Welcome to a Junior VC Unfiltered. I'm your host Mazen, and this week I have with me Shelly, Bhumika, Raj, and Shiraz. In this episode, we'll discuss our latest piece, Can BrowserStack be the world's software tester? Shiraz, can you tell our listeners why we chose to write about BrowserStack this week?
Yeah, sure thing, Mazen. So I think BrowserStack is at an interesting place in its life, where it's on the back of these three mega trends that we've talked about quite a bit on a junior VC. The first is building for developers. I think this has seen a massive rise in the last 5 to 10 years. You think about business to consumer businesses, you think about business to business consumer businesses, and now companies like Stripe and Twilio kind of created this category of selling to the developer, and BrowserStack really capitalized on that trend. The second is software companies starting in India and building for the world. And as the team will go into, that's something that BrowserStack has been maybe both intentionally and unintentionally kept in mind right from the beginning. And then the third is just this focus on building a community around their product from the early days on Twitter and Reddit and Stack Exchange, and using that as extremely low cost marketing funnel really. So the confluence of that, I think, has been recognized in the private markets from the investors, and it's really helped them gain the popularity that they have today. And we couldn't help but cover their story.
Thanks, Shiraz. It really is an interesting story. Shelly, can you take us back to how did they get started and what problem were they solving?
Yeah, sure, Mazen. So I think we should go back to 2011 when Ritesh and Nakul, the two co-founders, were brainstorming in a Mumbai coffee shop. They were serial entrepreneurs. They were running other businesses. And then at that point of time, they decided to build a website for their consulting business to promote their projects and find a new product to their liking. Now, this was the time when internet was still in nascent stage, and Ritesh and Nakul's internet access put them in less than 10% of the population. And since it was 2011, Google Chrome and Firefox were also in infancy, and the chosen browser to work was Internet Explorer. So Nakul and Ritesh wanted to leverage this gap, and they sort of built their website in just 2 days. Nakul built it in 2 days. When it came to testing, putting it to testing, setting up and debugging the code, it would take them almost 4 to 5 days to just set up the entire process, because virtual testing systems were non-existent. So at that point, they took a step back and decided to see how big this problem was, whether other folks were also facing this problem of testing, and are there any solutions for it. So they did a little market research, and eventually they found their aha moment, where they thought that they would build a virtual service where other testers can come and use their service on the browser and test their website. And now again, from having problems with Internet Explorer, they actually became resellers of Internet Explorer, because their entire service was also built on the same platform. Now, coming to their focus on the global aspect of things from the beginning, I think they both were they both were contributors to the global developer community. They contributed to the open source community and were among the first few adopters of Ruby of Rails in India. And their Ruby of Rails blog actually became the most popular blog on the internet. Now, building for these builders appeared as a monstrous challenge, but even so, it had a certain charm. And I think what they focused on was the core functionality of the product rather than marketing. So they chose the most basic thing. Like, they went where the customers were, where the developers were, and they decided to build a product out. So they launched a beta version of the product in 4 months, and it started getting traction from all over the world. Developers were liking it. Founder of jQuery, John Resnick, also tweeted about it that he liked the product. So it soon started then they moved on from building a developer platform for one browser to cross browser and eventually to mobile testing and so on. So they in a way they found that they wanted to build an infrastructure for testing for all the browsers across devices, which is what their future plan also looks like.
Thanks, Shelly. Really an incredible origin story. Bhumika, can you shed some more light into what the market looked like, how BrowserStack priced their product, and how they went about fundraising?
Sure, Mazen. So as Shelly mentioned, BrowserStack's free product received a lot of interest from the community, and that led to the team beginning to monetizing since day one, something that they hadn't really planned for. So they went on to charge $19 per month as a part of a pay-as-you-go model, which also explains how they've remained profitable since day one. And within half a year, they grew to making $20,000 a month. And finally, they felt constrained by the pay-as-you-go. And they did their research and introduced a 5-tier pricing model. And now they had 3 products by 2014 with 5 unique pricing plans for each of them. So their customers were basically staring at 15 different plans to choose from. And oftentimes this would leave their customers very confused, especially in the process of picking a plan for teams. There were just too many choices and the whole thing was a dizzying experience. And they'd find feedback about this in their support tickets. So this would actually turn out to be a very sort of turning point for BrowserStack, as it would result in the birth of their winning formula, which was BrowserStack for Enterprise. Now they switched to offering 3 broad plans, one being live, which was offering all the manual testing features. Second one being automate, which was offering all live and automated testing features. And the third one was the enterprise, which was a customizable plan based on whatever a corporation would want. So this enterprise plan proved to play a central role on the onboarding of so many of these companies that BrowserStack, eventually partnered with. And over the years, Microsoft, Twitter, Spotify, Cisco, you name them, they'd grown, quite a following from the diverse dev community. And so normally founders would look at this as a good time to visit a couple of VCs, having found early product market fit. But Ritesh and Rakul's previous ventures, had taught them that they had to be capital conscious. So they thought, yeah, sure, let's remain bootstrapped for a little while. But this little while lasted quite long. Within 4 years of bootstrapping, the company had reached a revenue of $20 million, and all of this was funded by their own profits. And the testing ecosystem at the same time was also evolving. So in the early years, developers would rely on the waterfall testing method, in which each phase of the software development lifecycle had to be completed before the next phase could begin, and there would be no overlapping between the phases. And the issues with this model are plain as day. The most important of which is the fact that no working software would be produced until late during into the life cycle. So previously testing was a back-end function within the life cycle, but soon a huge number of players started popping up in all sorts of sectors that we can think of, both web-based and mobile-based applications, and they were serving a more demanding and increasingly impatient group of users. So the world had reached almost 8.5 billion cellular subscriptions in 2018, with a penetration rate of 97%. And there were roughly around 2.1 million Android-based and 2 million iOS-based apps. So in the later half of 2018 itself. So now the industry was predicted to generate $200 million within 2 years. So naturally, the price tag on testing also rose. And as a direct result, 9 out of 10 enterprises announced that they wanted to focus on mobile testing. And this opened up yet another market opportunity. So, and things had changed a lot in the web browser space as well. Like, we might think of it as slightly more static, but nobody was compelled to use the Internet Explorer anymore. As a matter of fact, at the time of filming this video, even Wikipedia confirms that Internet Explorer is a thing of the past. It's going to reach its natural end within the next month. So Google Chrome was now behemoth. Safari was back with a bang, and a whole new class of web browsers were up and coming. So realizing how important it was to get software out quickly, test it on every possible place that they had to. Testing was no longer done in a vacuum. It sort of became a part and parcel of the earlier stages of software development. And in fact, to say earlier stages is not technically right in the sense, because devs were not thinking of this as a linear timeline anymore. The agile and continuous integration and deployment went mainstream, and more than 75% of companies were reporting that they had now adopted these methodologies in some capacity. So as testing, gained the center stage, improving the process of testing was going to be vital to provide great user experiences. And the addressable market for software testing was expected to grow to $76 billion by early 2022, which was a massive opportunity. So by 2018, BrowserStack was thriving at a $50 million revenue run rate, but it was still bootstrapped and profitable. But now the founders are feeling that, they had to partner with someone that had previously coached someone in the software space. And they raised $50 million in their Series A. Now, ML and AI were changing every aspect of every field that technology had ever touched. So of course, software testing was not going to be left behind, and automated testing went mainstream. Now companies wanted to spend lesser and lesser man hours on any forms of testing that could be automated. And the global test automation market was also valued at $24 billion in 18 itself. So it was expected to reach approximately 55 billion by 22. So opportunity begets competition, and BrowserStack had to keep their head in the game to continue to stay at the top.
Quite the story. Thanks so much, Bhumika. Raj, can you tell us how BrowserStack is doing today, and what does the future look like for them?
Right. So to understand how BrowserStack is doing today, we should ideally start from how BrowserStack maintained their competitive edge in a 24 billion testing industry, and how essentially their subsequent fundraise propelled them to their next growth orbit, which has now positioned them to feed the appetite of software, which is ultimately going to eat the world. So essentially, as Monica mentioned, $24 billion industry. How do you maintain your competitive edge? You do that by creating a very, very strong community who essentially become your flag bearers, your marketeers, spreading your good name through word of mouth. And that essentially, one, keeps your marketing dollars to a sum total of 0. And at the same time, you have very high net promoter score. And from the very beginning, Ritish's idea was to do something to solve a real problem, a problem that is large enough, and ideally a problem which is plaguing a large portion of the target segment's life, but yet they're unaware of such a problem. Keeping this in mind, testing per se is the problem of every developer. So how do you so the moment you devise a solution to solve this particular pain point, you essentially convert each and every developer who has ever used your product into your promoter. And that's what happened. Essentially, within a week of their beta launch, there were 10,000 users on the platform, and John Rassick's tweet just went viral. And that's when people started asking Ritesh that, do you have a paid version of the product? In today's world where a lot of consumer startups are burning a lot of money, people proactively coming forward to ask whether they have a paid product and actually be willing to pay for such a service is something which is not very common. That's when Ritesh devised the product, set it live. And then after that, after 8 years, even after 8 years, now it's on the 10th year, but for the first 8 years, there wasn't any marketing division that existed. So these two things essentially had a very strong foundation for two pillars. One, you have a very loyal set of users who would only continue to increase. And the second thing is you get to spend all your budget on research and development and improving the product, because you don't have to spend anything on CAC or any marketing, nothing of that sort. So, and the third outcome of these two, essentially the outcome of these two foundations is that you run a very large, a very successful and a profitable company, which has the potential to scale globally. Now that brings to the next question. How would a company that is running on a 50 million run rate for the year scale globally? Ritesh obviously was a developer by profession and by training. This is something for which he needed to have a partner who had the vision. Obviously, he had raised a 50 million Series A, but then uh, as COVID essentially expedited the digitization of the world, there was huge opportunity lying. So, that was the opportune moment when he could partner or bring on board another investor who had a very similar experience in blitzscaling tech companies, the likes of Facebook, Shopify, such big unicorns across the globe, and have them on board so that the next trajectory or the next level, the next orbit of the growth is essentially unlocked. So that's how BrowserStack latest unicorn status came about, a 200 million funding. The interesting bit is after a total, now that the company is valued at $4 billion, they had raised above $250 million almost. Uh, the founders' equity is still above 80%. So that's essentially something to think about. The first round they raised, they had diluted 10%. The second round they raised for 200 mil, they had just diluted 5%. So with an 80% founders equity, they have created enormous wealth for themselves, the employees that have joined them in terms of ESOPs, and at the same time, raising capital was never the main target for any of the founders when they went ahead to the industry. Their main focus was to get a partner who could help them scale. Not many have this liberty of choosing partners. That being said, I think it's time we should probably understand why there was such a demand for this particular company in the eyes of the VCs. They had been chased around from numerous VCs across the globe, essentially, across Silicon Valley, in Bangalore, in India, everywhere. The problem that Ritesh had solved and is still solving is something which is very real, and going forward, it is just going to exacerbate. So let's understand how testing is important. When we start with in the 2011, pre 2010s, Internet Explorer was a browser of choice, and then developers would test their code in the web browser, essentially, which was again where they had developed the code. Then came mobile. Mobile was so testing for mobile was difficult because that's not where developers would develop their code. And going forward, you have every kind of smart devices. You have wearables, you have IoT, you have everything that you can think of, numerous smart health devices. None of those interfaces actually allow for development. They are just allowing for testing and deployment. So how do you develop a code that is massively replicable, can have a very fast testing turnaround time? That's where BrowserStack comes in, giving you not only a cross-browser experience, but being the testing platform for the internet. And that's why if software is eating the world, BrowserStack is enabling software to maintain its appetite. That's why it's so important today. It's so important that to appreciate the fact that founders retain almost even more than 80% of the company. At the same time, raising money was never about raising money. So that's super counterintuitive, but that's the case with BrowserStack. So now they're supremely poised to take on the world, to keep on feeding them. As long as software exists, BrowserStack would exist. And now that it's entrenched so deeply into the minds of the developers that the 10 years ago developers didn't realize that they needed something like this, but now that they have it, they can't live without it. So that's the impact that BrowserStack has had.
Amazing story of creating a fantastic product, investing in developing a better product, and also retaining an immense amount of value for themselves. Thanks so much, Raj. And thank you everyone for tuning in to a Junior VC Unfiltered. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will see you next week.